The night sky was shredded with tracer fire, and the low hum of explosions reverberated across the battlefield. Corporal Alyssa Grant clutched the rope ladder of the hovering Blackhawk, her palms slick with sweat, rain, and grime. Every nerve in her body screamed at her to pull herself inside, to escape the chaos. But her eyes were fixed on the soldiers sprawled across the mud-soaked ground below, some barely conscious, others trapped under twisted metal. There was no hesitation. She was trained for this. She had trained for this, even when she had doubted if she could survive her own fear. Now, fear had no place in her mind. Only duty remained. The Blackhawk shuddered as rounds pinged off its fuselage. The pilot fought to maintain altitude, shouting orders over the roaring wind and gunfire. Alyssa adjusted her grip, swung down, and landed hard beside Private Moreno, whose leg was pinned under a fallen supply crate. She heard him groan, and without a word, she slid under the crate and pushed it off. The soldier's eyes widened in shock and relief. "Get up, we don't have time," she yelled, as another explosion erupted nearby, sending dirt and shrapnel spraying. Every second felt like an eternity. Bullets stitched the air around them, some tearing through the metal frame of the helicopter, others cutting close to the soldiers on the ground. Alyssa's mind was a laser-focused sequence of actions. Lift, drag, cover, climb. She grabbed Moreno under the armpits and hoisted him onto her shoulders. His weight was staggering, but the adrenaline pumping through her veins made it feel almost light. Her fellow soldier, Lieutenant Carter, ran to cover the extraction zone from the opposite side, firing back at the enemy forces advancing from a tree. The coordination had to be perfect. One misstep, and they would all be gone before dawn. Almost there. Alyssa shouted, guiding Moreno toward the Blackhawk's rope ladder. A bullet ricocheted dangerously close, and she flinched, but kept moving. She had seen her comrades fall, and the thought of being next was never far, but giving up was never an option. Every life she saved mattered, and she could feel it in her bones. She hoisted Moreno up and into the waiting arms of the flight crew. Then, with a swift pivot, she grabbed the rope ladder herself, climbing upward while enemy fire stitched the night sky. Rain hammered against her helmet, making visibility nearly impossible. Her muscles burned, her hands screamed in pain, but she refused to let go. She had a mission, and she would see it through, even if it cost her everything. The Blackhawk's engines roared louder as the pilot maneuvered to avoid an incoming rocket. Alyssa reached the top and slammed herself onto the floor of the helicopter. Another wave of gunfire tore across the battlefield, and she felt the shudder of near misses. Her heart raced, but she was alive, and the soldiers she had helped were alive too. The mission was far from over, but this first extraction had been a victory. Every second counted, every life mattered, and Alyssa knew that what she had done tonight would be remembered, not as a story of fear, but as a story of courage and relentless resolve. No sooner had the Blackhawk cleared the tree line than Alyssa scanned the battlefield for more soldiers in need. The enemy was advancing fast, taking advantage of the darkness and the chaos. But she had trained for this. 2 soldiers were trapped near a supply bunker, pinned by debris and heavy fire. Without hesitation, she grabbed her second partner, Sergeant Riley, and they secured themselves to the rope ladder again, descending into the inferno below. The wind whipped violently, nearly toppling them as bullets tore through the air. Alyssa landed first, her boots sinking into the wet mud. She spotted the first soldier, a young private who was barely conscious. Blood streaked his face, and his uniform was torn. "Hang on," she yelled, rolling under a fallen beam and grabbing him under the arms. Riley covered her, firing precise bursts toward enemy positions. Every movement had to be calculated. Every misstep could be fatal. With the soldier lifted onto her back, Alyssa ran toward the rope ladder, dodging bullets that chipped into the metal and splintered the earth around them. The helicopter's engines roared, almost deafening, but she tuned everything else out except the path upward. Reaching the ladder, She handed the wounded soldier into the helicopter and turned back for the second. Time was slipping away. She knew the enemy reinforcements were closing in. The second extraction was even more dangerous. A mortar shell exploded near them, sending mud and debris into the air. Riley shouted, "Move!" and they dove behind a partially collapsed wall. Alyssa crawled through the wreckage, dragging the soldier by his uniform. As the enemy fire grew more intense, every muscle screamed, every breath burned. But the mission was more important than her pain. She hoisted the soldier onto her shoulders and sprinted toward the ladder again. Climbing back into the Blackhawk, she could feel the sweat, blood, and exhaustion soaking her uniform. The pilot gave a thumbs up, signaling they were pulling back for safety. Alyssa collapsed onto the floor, adrenaline still pumping through her veins. She looked around at Riley and the rescued soldiers, catching her breath, knowing they had survived what no one thought possible. The night had been merciless, the battlefield unforgiving, but two women had gone where most wouldn't dare, and they had brought hope back to those who needed it most. Even as the helicopter lifted into the sky, the war wasn't over. But for tonight, Alyssa knew they had made a difference, one life at a time. And when dawn came, she would be ready to descend into the fire again, because courage was not optional, and she would never leave a comrade behind. The thunder of artillery echoed across the valley as Corporal Alyssa Grant sprinted toward the damaged bridge. Smoke and dust curled into the sky, painting a gray haze over the shattered landscape. Reports had come in that a supply convoy was trapped on the other side, and every second the bridge remained unstable meant more lives at risk. Alyssa's squad had reached the edge of the debris-strewn structure, but the enemy was closing in fast. Her partner, Sergeant Riley, set up the explosive charges to stabilize the remaining supports, while Alyssa assessed the bridge's twisted steel beams. Water roared below, carrying debris that threatened to tear anything off the surface. The wind whipped across the fractured span, threatening to knock even the most careful soldier off balance. Alyssa took a deep breath, steeling herself. Every movement mattered. One slip, one miscalculation, and not only would the convoy be lost, but so would the rescuers. She ran across the first section of the bridge, her boots clanging against metal. Bullets stitched the air around them, some ricocheting off the steel, others slamming into the concrete, sending dust plumes skyward. She reached the first vehicle, a supply truck teetering dangerously on a broken beam. The driver was frozen in fear, his hands gripping the steering wheel like a lifeline. "Listen to me," Alyssa shouted, voice cutting through the roar of the river and the gunfire. "Stay calm. We'll get you out." As Riley detonated stabilizing charges, Alyssa guided the driver and the few soldiers out of the truck and toward a safer section. Every step was a calculation. She checked each beam with her foot, testing the integrity of the metal before moving forward. Enemy fire intensified. A sniper's bullet shattered a nearby support beam, and the bridge groaned in protest. The convoy's vehicles began to sway, some tipping precariously into the river below. Alyssa's stomach clenched, but she pushed forward. Fear had no place here. Only action, precision, and courage mattered. "Almost there," she shouted. The last vehicle, a Humvee carrying wounded soldiers, was trapped near the edge. Alyssa ran toward it, ignoring the bullets that zipped past her. She opened the door and helped the occupants climb out, guiding them to safety while Riley provided covering fire. A mortar shell landed nearby, sending a cloud of debris into the air, but Alyssa refused to falter. Each soldier she saved was a victory, each life a reason to keep fighting. Finally, with the convoy secured and the bridge partially stabilized, Alyssa and Riley made their way back. They had risked everything, but the mission had been a success. As they regrouped with the rest of the squad, the sound of distant gunfire reminded them that this battlefield would not give them a moment's rest. But for now, they had held the line, proving that courage under fire could defy even the most dangerous odds. The desert night was a blanket of darkness, broken only by the distant flashes of fire and the low hum of helicopters approaching. Corporal Alyssa Grant crouched behind a sand dune, surveying the enemy encampment below. Her partner, Sergeant Riley, checked the coordinates and nodded. "We have a narrow window," Riley whispered. "Get ready." The Blackhawk descended silently, a shadow against the moonlit terrain. Alyssa signaled to the soldiers trapped in the open, waving them toward the rope ladders. The wind whipped through the rotor blades, creating a deafening roar that made communication nearly impossible. Bullets zipped past, kicking up sand around them, but Alyssa remained focused. Each movement had to be precise. Each action could mean the difference between life and death. She jumped down first, rolling into cover behind a rocky outcrop. 2 soldiers had been pinned down near a communications tower. Their radios were destroyed, leaving them stranded and vulnerable. Alyssa sprinted toward them, dodging sniper fire and ricocheting bullets. She reached Private Thompson, who had been struck in the leg, and lifted him with remarkable strength, despite the weight pressing against her already exhausted body. "I've got you," she shouted. Riley provided covering fire, eliminating threats methodically while Alyssa dragged Thompson toward the extraction zone. Explosions erupted nearby as the enemy attempted to flank them, but they pressed forward. Reaching the rope ladder, Alyssa handed Thompson up into the Blackhawk, then turned back for the second soldier. The second extraction was more perilous. Enemy reinforcements arrived, and a firefight erupted around them. Alyssa's heart pounded as she sprinted across open sand, keeping low and calculating each move. She reached the second soldier, a medic pinned behind debris, and helped him up. Together, she and Riley made it back to the ladder, climbing into the Blackhawk as gunfire stitched the desert around them. Once inside, Alyssa slumped against the floor, breathing heavily, feeling the sweat and grime soaking through her uniform. The pilot gave them a nod. The extraction had been a success. The rescued soldiers were alive, thanks to the courage and skill of 2 women who had faced impossible odds without hesitation. Outside, the desert stretched endlessly, a silent witness to the bravery that had unfolded beneath the moonlight. The sun had barely risen when Lieutenant Alyssa Grant crouched behind the rocky outcrop overlooking the enemy stronghold. Intelligence reports had confirmed that this fortified compound was the source of repeated attacks on nearby villages, and today, she and her squad were tasked with taking it down. Every member of her team knew the stakes. Failure was an option, and every second counted. She adjusted her tactical headset and scanned the perimeter. 2 snipers had been spotted on the eastern wall, and patrols were moving in a predictable pattern. Alyssa whispered instructions to her partner, Sergeant Riley, who checked the explosives strapped to the doors and windows. "We go in fast, precise, and silent," she reminded the team. Alyssa's eyes narrowed. This wasn't just another mission. Lives hung in the balance, and the smallest mistake could mean death. They moved in, shadows among shadows, approaching the first outer fence. Alyssa cut the wires silently, signaling the team forward. The guards were distracted by routine checks, giving them the split second they needed to slip inside. She led the way, checking corners and doorways, every movement calculated. Bullets would come, she knew, and she was ready. The first room held 3 armed sentries. Alyssa and Riley entered simultaneously, rifles raised, and in a heartbeat, the threat was neutralized. The precision of their teamwork was almost silent, almost surgical. Other squad members followed, clearing rooms floor by floor. The tension was palpable, every shadow a potential ambush. As they reached the central hall, a siren blared, signaling that their presence had been detected. The enemy poured in from all sides, and gunfire erupted. Alyssa ducked behind a half-collapsed wall, taking a deep breath and counting the shots before returning fire. Her team was pinned, but she refused to retreat. With a well-aimed grenade, she cleared the room enough to allow her squad to advance. Riley and Alyssa led the charge toward the stronghold's command center. Enemy officers attempted to barricade the doors, but the women breached the entry with a combination of explosives and sheer determination. Inside, a group of hostages huddled in fear. Alyssa reassured them, gesturing for them to stay low as Riley set up protective barriers and returned fire when enemies tried to follow. After nearly 40 minutes of continuous fighting, the stronghold was under their control. The hostages were safe, and the enemy forces were either captured or neutralized. Alyssa's heart pounded in exhaustion, but she allowed herself a brief nod of satisfaction. They had accomplished the impossible, and the courage, precision, and leadership of two women had turned the tide. The desert sun beat down mercilessly as Corporal Alyssa Grant raced across the shifting sands, her Humvee kicking up clouds of dust behind her. Intelligence had confirmed that a high-value target had fled into the desert with several hostages. The clock was ticking. Each passing minute meant lives could be lost. Alyssa's co-pilot, Sergeant Riley, scanned the horizon for signs of movement. "There," Riley shouted, pointing to a dust cloud in the distance. The convoy was moving fast, and the terrain was unforgiving. The Humvee bounced over dunes, engines roaring, as the women maneuvered skillfully through the rough landscape. Bullets whipped past them from enemy escorts trying to prevent their pursuit. Alyssa adjusted her seat and took careful aim through the mounted weapon, neutralizing threats with precision, while Riley coordinated the other vehicles in their squad. Each shot counted. Each movement had to be timed perfectly. A wrong turn, a slip in the sand, could send them tumbling into a ravine. They closed the distance, and Alyssa spotted the lead vehicle attempting a sharp turn near a canyon. "Hold on," she yelled, slamming the Humvee into a skid, narrowly avoiding a collision. Dust and debris flew as the vehicle teetered on the canyon's edge, but they stayed in pursuit. Riley provided cover, her calm voice guiding the team as bullets ricocheted off the metal. Finally, the convoy was within reach. Alyssa accelerated, ramming the rear vehicle and forcing it to stop. Enemy forces scrambled, but the squad's tactical coordination was impeccable. Hostages were secured, and prisoners subdued with minimal risk. Alyssa's hands were blistered, her body aching, but the mission was a success. They had driven through fire, sand, and relentless pursuit, saving lives against impossible odds. As the sun set over the desert, painting the sky in fiery reds and golds, Alyssa allowed herself a moment to breathe. The chase was over, the hostages safe, and once again, courage and determination had prevailed. The icy wind cut through the high-altitude pass as Lieutenant Alyssa Grant scanned the rocky cliffs. Her squad's mission was clear: extract a group of Allied soldiers trapped behind enemy lines. The terrain was treacherous, and every step carried the risk of falling rocks or sudden ambush. Alyssa adjusted her harness and checked her oxygen mask. At 12,000 feet, fatigue set in faster, and mistakes could be fatal. "Team, eyes sharp," she whispered into her headset. Sergeant Riley nodded beside her, already assessing the path down the narrow ledge. The extraction point was still half a mile away, but time was running out. Enemy patrols were rumored in the valleys below, and movement had to be silent. The team descended carefully, one by one, while Alyssa kept scanning the surroundings. Suddenly, gunfire erupted from a ridge above. Alyssa dove for cover, signaling her squad to return fire. She calculated angles, directing her team with precise commands as bullets ricocheted off rock walls. "Suppressing fire on my mark," she barked, coordinating the squad's response. Minutes felt like hours, but the team managed to neutralize the ambush. With the path partially clear, Alyssa led the squad through narrow gullies and steep slopes, finally reaching the trapped soldiers huddled in the snow. The sight of relief on their faces steeled Alyssa's resolve. "We've got you. Stay low and follow us," she instructed. Riley and Alyssa organized the injured onto stretchers, while the rest of the squad provided cover. The extraction helicopter was delayed, and the enemy wasn't far behind. The women had to keep the group moving on foot until the aircraft arrived. Every decision mattered. One slip could send lives tumbling down the mountain. Hours later, exhausted and frozen, the team reached a cliffside landing zone. The helicopter arrived just in time, and one by one, the soldiers were lifted to safety. Alyssa stayed until the last man was aboard, then climbed into the aircraft herself. The wind howled as the helicopter rose above the mountains, carrying the team to safety. Her muscles ached, her body was numb, but the mission had succeeded. Courage, precision, and leadership had made the impossible possible. The city skyline burned red as explosions echoed across the streets. Lieutenant Alyssa Grant and Sergeant Riley were the last line of defense, protecting a critical command post from an overwhelming enemy assault. Their team had been scattered, casualties mounting, but retreat wasn't an option. "Hold your positions," Alyssa shouted into the radio, voice steady despite exhaustion. Riley covered the flank, firing with precision as enemies surged forward. Every window, doorway, and alleyway was a potential ambush, but Alyssa's mind remained razor-sharp. She directed the few remaining soldiers, setting up barricades and positioning snipers. The attackers advanced in waves, and Alyssa calculated every move, every shot. She moved swiftly between positions, providing cover and picking off enemy soldiers with surgical precision. Riley covered her as they fell back to the final defensive point, a reinforced command center holding vital intelligence. Inside, civilians and high-ranking officers were huddled. Alyssa reassured them, her voice calm despite the chaos outside. She coordinated with the remaining snipers, timing shots perfectly to slow the enemy advance. Each breath was a battle, each decision a life-or-death gamble. Hours passed like minutes. Explosions shook the building, debris fell, but Alyssa refused to yield. She crawled through smoke and rubble, repositioning snipers, assisting the wounded, and keeping morale intact. Riley, by her side, mirrored her courage, their teamwork seamless under fire. As night fell, reinforcements finally arrived. Alyssa directed the counterattack, turning the tide. The remaining enemy forces were captured or neutralized. Exhausted, injured, but victorious, Alyssa stood amid the ruin, looking at the city she had helped protect. She had faced impossible odds, led through chaos, and never once faltered. Every mission, every sacrifice, every step had led to this moment. She had saved lives, defended her team, and proven that courage and determination could overcome even the darkest of nights.